The dust devils danced across the main street of Willow Creek, spinning their wild waltz in the afternoon heat. Clara Mitchell pressed herself against the weathered boards of Henderson's general store, trying to make herself invisible as the townswomen passed by with their parasols and whispers. Their words carried on the dry wind like tumbleweeds, sharp and cutting. There she goes, the cursed one. Mrs. Abigail Foster muttered to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. 23 years old, and not a single man will have her. Mark my words. Martha, that girl carries darkness with her. Clara's fingers tightened on the empty flour sack she carried. She had heard these words so many times they should have lost their sting, but each repetition still drew blood from old wounds. She waited until the women passed before stepping into the dusty street, her worn boots making soft sounds against the packed earth. Willow Creek sat like a festering sore in the belly of the frontier, a town of perhaps 300 souls clinging to life where the plains met the foothills. It was 1882, and the railroad had passed them by, leaving the town to slowly strangle on its own bitter prejudices. The buildings lined the main street like broken teeth, the saloon, the church, the general store, and a handful of other establishments that barely kept their doors open. Clara lived with her Aunt Henrietta in a small cabin on the edge of town, where the respectable folks wouldn't have to see her too often. It hadn't always been this way. Once, she had been just another child running through these streets, her laughter mixing with the others. But that was before the fire. The flames had taken everything when she was 15. Her parents' homestead, their crops, their lives, all reduced to ash and char on a terrible August night. The official cause was lightning, but whispers started almost immediately. Her mother, Rose, had been half Cherokee, married to a white man who'd loved her despite the stares. Some said it was unnatural. Some said Rose had practiced dark medicine. When she died screaming in the flames alongside Clara's father, the town decided it was punishment for sins unnamed, and Clara, the only survivor, became the inheritor of their invented curse. She hurried past the saloon where men lounged in the shade, their eyes following her movement with the lazy interest of predators too hot to hunt. One of them, Jack Thornton, called out something crude that made the others laugh. Clara kept walking, her spine straight despite the trembling in her chest. At the well near the town square, she stopped to fill her water bucket. The rope was rough against her palms, already calloused from years of work. She had nearly finished when she heard the approaching footsteps. "You shouldn't be using the good well," Nancy Brewster said, her voice pitched loud enough for others to hear. Nancy was 19, pretty in the way that frontier towns measured such things, and engaged to the banker's son. "This water is for decent folk." Clara didn't turn around. "The well belongs to the town. Nancy, I have as much right—" The splash of dirty water across her back cut off her words. She gasped, spinning around to see Nancy holding an empty wash bucket, a satisfied smirk on her face. "There," Nancy said. "Now you're as dirty outside as you are inside." Clara stood frozen, muddy water dripping from her hair, her dress clinging to her back. A small crowd had gathered, their faces showing mixtures of amusement and disgust. Not one person moved to help or protest. That's when she saw him. The stranger sat atop a dust-covered bay horse at the edge of the square, his hat tilted low against the sun. Unlike the townspeople, he wasn't laughing. His face, weathered by sun and wind, remained impassive, but his eyes, dark as coffee and twice as bitter, held something Clara couldn't name. They locked with hers for a long moment, and she saw a flicker of, what, recognition? Understanding? Then he touched his hat brim slightly, turned his horse, and rode on toward the stockyards. Clara fled, leaving her water bucket behind. Jed Hartwell had seen plenty of cruelty in his 34 years. The frontier bred it like it bred dust and desperation. But something about the scene at the well lodged in his chest like a splinter. The girl, woman, really, hadn't cowered or begged. She'd stood there taking the abuse with a dignity that reminded him of a Mustang he'd once seen. Surrounded by wolves, but refusing to run. He delivered his cattle to the stockyard manager. collected his payment, and should have ridden on. That was the plan. Deliver the beeves, resupply, and get back to his ranch in the hill country. He didn't need complications, especially not the kind that came with defending town pariahs. But when evening painted the sky purple and gold, he found himself at the town's only boarding house, taking a room for the night. "You here for long, Mr. Hartwell?" The proprietress, Mrs. Donnelly, asked as she showed him to a small but clean room. "Just the night, ma'am." She nodded, then paused at the door. "You'll want to take your meals at the saloon. I don't serve everyone." Something in her tone made it clear this wasn't about money. "That so?" Jed kept his voice neutral. "Oh yes, can't have certain types mixing with decent folks. You understand?" Jed understood more than she knew. Back in her aunt's cabin, Clara scrubbed her dress in the wash basin, her movements mechanical. Aunt Henrietta sat in her rocking chair, complaining about her rheumatism and the cost of coffee and how Clara's curse made everything harder. "Couldn't even get a fair price for eggs today," Henrietta wheezed. "Soon as they see you coming with me, they remember what you are." Clara said nothing. She had learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. Instead, she thought about the stranger's eyes, the way he'd looked at her like she was a person worth seeing. It was foolish, she knew, to hold on to such a small thing. He was probably already gone, just another drifter passing through. But for the first time in years, Clara went to sleep thinking about something other than mere survival. The next morning came too soon, bringing with it the endless chores that kept their small household running. Clara rose before dawn to tend the chickens, gather eggs, and start the fire for breakfast. Her aunt would sleep another hour at least, giving Clara precious moments of solitude. She had just finished feeding the chickens when she heard horses approaching. Fear tightened her throat. Early morning visits rarely brought good news for outcasts, but it was only a lone rider, leading a pack horse. The stranger from yesterday. He stopped at their gate but didn't dismount. In the growing light, Clara could see him better. His face bore the marks of a hard life, a scar through one eyebrow, lines carved by weather and worry. But his eyes remained steady, watchful. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat. "Wondered if you might have eggs to sell. Heard in town you keep chickens." Clara stared at him, surprised. Yes, we have eggs. I'd be obliged to buy 2 dozen if you can spare them, paying fair price." She named a price, half expecting him to balk or try to haggle her down like everyone else. Instead, he nodded and reached for his money pouch. That's more than fair price." Clara found herself saying, "Price I named is what they're worth." He replied simply, as she gathered the eggs in a basket, careful not to crack any. She felt his eyes on her, not the way men usually looked at her, like something to be used or discarded, but with that same quiet assessment from yesterday. "Name's Jed Hartwell," he said when she handed him the basket. "Run cattle up in the hill country. Clara Mitchell." The words came out barely above a whisper. He packed the eggs carefully in his saddlebags, then looked back at her. "They always treat you that way? In town?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "I manage." "Wasn't what I asked." She lifted her chin. "Why do you care?" For the first time, she saw what might have been a smile touch the corner of his mouth. "Maybe I don't like seeing wolves circle something that ain't meant to be prey." Then he was gone, riding out as the sun broke fully over the horizon, leaving Clara standing by the gate with coins in her hand and questions in her heart. The land dispute started the way most troubles did in Willow Creek, with greed dressed up as righteousness. Samuel Morrison, the town's wealthiest rancher, had set his sights on the quarter section where Henrietta's cabin stood. It was good water access he wanted, and the fact that the town pariah lived there made it easier to justify. Clara first learned of it when Sheriff Wade Brennan arrived with papers on a Tuesday morning, his deputy lurking behind him like a nervous shadow. "Henrietta Mitchell," the sheriff called from the gate, not bothering to approach the house properly. And Henrietta emerged, leaning heavily on her cane. "What's this about, Sheriff?" "Got a legal notice here. Mr. Morrison's claiming prior rights to this land. Says your deed's invalid." Clara watched from the doorway as her aunt's face went pale. "My husband bought this land fair and square 23 years ago." "Well, ma'am, that's for the judge to decide. Court date's set for next month." He tossed the papers on the ground rather than hand them over. "Might want to start making other arrangements." After they left, Henrietta collapsed into her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. "We're finished," she whispered. "Morrison owns the judge, owns half the town. Where will we go?" Clara knelt beside her aunt, trying to offer comfort she didn't feel. They both knew the truth. No one in Willow Creek would rent to them, and they had no money to go elsewhere. 3 days later, Jed Hartwell rode back into town. He had business at the bank, he told himself. Nothing to do with brown eyes that held too much pain or eggs bought at fair price. But when he heard the talk in the saloon about Morrison's land grab, his jaw tightened. "About time someone cleared that cursed nest out," Jack Thornton was saying over whiskey. "Maybe once that witch girl is gone, we'll have some peace." "Peace?" Jed's voice cut through the laughter. "That what you call stealing from women and calling it law?" The saloon went quiet. Thornton turned, his hand hovering near his gun. "This ain't your business, stranger." "Maybe not." Jed finished his drink slowly, deliberately. "But I've seen what happens when folks let wrong stand because it's easier. Tends to spread like wildfire." He left before anyone could respond, but not before he heard Morrison's name mentioned with the kind of reverence reserved for kings and tyrants. At the land office, Jed spent an hour reviewing records. What he found made his expression darken further. Morrison had filed similar claims against 3 other properties in the past 2 years, all owned by widows or outsiders. All had been forced to sell for pennies on the dollar. When he arrived at the Mitchell cabin that evening, Clara was drawing water from their small well. She froze when she saw him, bucket half raised. "Mr. Hartwell? Is something wrong? Heard about your trouble with Morrison." Her shoulders sagged slightly. "News travels fast. Faster when folks are celebrating." He dismounted, ground-tying his horse. "Your aunt home?" "She's resting. She hasn't been well since—" Clara trailed off, then straightened. "Why are you here?" "Because Morrison's playing a game I've seen before. And because—" He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "Let's just say I don't like unfair fights." He stayed for an hour, examining Henrietta's deed and taking notes. Clara served coffee, her hands steady despite her confusion. No one had ever helped them before. She kept waiting for him to name his price, to reveal what he wanted in exchange, but he simply worked, occasionally asking questions about dates and witnesses. "I'll wire a lawyer friend in Fort Worth," he said finally. "Man owes me a favor. He'll know how to handle Morrison's type." "We can't pay," Clara began. "Didn't ask you to." He stood, settling his hat. "I'll be back in a week with what he says." As he mounted his horse, Clara found her voice. "Why are you doing this?" He looked down at her, and for a moment his hard expression softened. "Maybe because I know what it's like to have the whole world set against you. Maybe because—" He stopped again, shook his head. "Just keep that deed safe. Miss Mitchell." A week passed slowly. Clara went about her duties, enduring the increasing boldness of the townspeople who sensed weakness. Twice, young men threw stones at their windows. Once, someone left a dead cat on their doorstep with a note, "This is what happens to witches." She was returning from the general store where Mrs. Henderson had served her only after all other customers were gone, when she heard the commotion. A cluster of people had gathered near the bakery, their voices raised in cruel amusement. "Dance for us! Witch girl!" someone shouted. Clara tried to go around them, but the circle closed, trapping her. She recognized the faces. Nancy Brewster, Jack Thornton, the Cutter brothers. All young, all drunk on their own power. "Please," she said quietly, "let me pass. Say the magic words." Nancy taunted. "Cast a spell. Why don't you?" Someone pushed Clara from behind. She stumbled, nearly dropping her packages. The circle tightened, hands reaching out to shove and pinch. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized how far from help she was. Then hoofbeats thundered down the street. Jed Hartwell didn't slow his horse until he was almost upon them, making the crowd scatter. He swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion, positioning himself between Clara and her tormentors. "Anybody want to explain what's happening here?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Just having some fun with the witch," one of the Cutter boys said, though he took a step back. "Fun." Jed tested the word like he might test the edge of a knife. "That what you call it when 6 people corner one woman?" "She's cursed," Nancy Brewster protested. "Everyone knows. I know you're about 10 seconds from finding out what I think of people who prey on those who can't fight back." His hand rested on his gun belt, casual but unmistakable. "Now move along, unless you want to discuss this further." They dispersed, muttering threats and curses. Jed waited until they were gone before turning to Clara. She stood frozen, packages clutched to her chest, eyes wide. "You hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Come on, I'll walk you home. You don't have to—" "Miss Mitchell." His tone brooked no argument. "Let me walk you home." They moved through the streets in silence, his presence creating a bubble of space around them. At her gate, Clara finally spoke. "They'll make you a target now. For helping me. Let them try." He paused, studying her face. "That lawyer I mentioned, he found something interesting. Seems Morrison's been filing false claims using forged documents. Your aunt's deed is solid, but his isn't. Court date might go different than he expects." Hope flickered in Clara's chest, fragile as a candle flame. "Truly?" "Truly, but you need to be careful until then. Morrison doesn't like losing." She nodded, then surprised herself by asking, Would you like some coffee? To thank you for—" "No thanks needed." But he dismounted anyway. "Though I wouldn't turn down coffee." They sat on the porch as the sun set, not speaking much but finding comfort in the shared silence. Clara discovered that Jed had a way of being still that made the world feel less sharp-edged. When he finally left, she stood at the gate watching until he disappeared into the gathering dusk. That night, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to have someone stand beside her always, the way he had stood between her and the crowd. It was a dangerous thought for a woman like her, but in the darkness of her small room, she held it close like a secret warmth. The harassment grew worse as the court date approached. Morrison's men began riding past the cabin at all hours, whooping and firing guns into the air. The sheriff, when appealed to, simply shrugged and said boys would be boys. But each time things seemed darkest, Jed would appear, sometimes at the well when she went for water, sometimes at the store when she knew the crowds would be worst. He never made a show of it, never claimed to be protecting her. He was simply there, a steady presence that made her tormentors think twice. "People are talking," Aunt Henrietta warned one evening. "They're saying you're trying to trap him. Use your wiles." "I haven't done anything," Clara protested. "Doesn't matter what you've done. Matters what they think." Her aunt's eyes were shrewd despite her illness. "That man's sweet on you, girl. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Clara had no answer. How could she explain the way her heart lifted when she saw his horse? The way his rare, almost smiles made her forget, just for a moment, what she was. She knew better than to hope. She'd learned that lesson young. But still, when she saw him riding up the path the day before the trial, his saddlebags bulging with what looked like legal papers, she couldn't stop the smile that bloomed across her face. And when he smiled back, a real smile this time, she thought maybe, just maybe, the world held more possibilities than she'd ever dared imagine. The trial had gone better than anyone expected. Jed's lawyer friend had exposed Morrison's forged documents, and the judge, perhaps fearing scrutiny from Fort Worth, had ruled in Henrietta's favor. But Clara knew Morrison too well to believe it was over. Men like him didn't accept defeat gracefully. The proof came 3 nights later. $50, Aunt Henrietta announced over their meager supper. "That's what Elias Blackwood offered for you." Clara's spoon clattered against her bowl. "What? You heard me." Her aunt's face was flushed, whether from shame or wine. Clara couldn't tell. $50 to take you as his housekeeper. Maybe more if you suit. Elias Blackwood was 60 if he was a day. A widower who'd buried 2 wives already. His reputation for cruelty was exceeded only by his wealth from the silver mine he'd lucked into years back. "You can't be considering this," Clara whispered. "What choice do we have?" Henrietta slammed her hand on the table. "Morrison's put the word out. Anyone does business with us, they'll answer to him. We've got no money for supplies, no way to sell what little we produce. Least this way. One of us eats regular. I won't go." "You will if I say you will." Henrietta's cane struck the floor. "You owe me. Girl. Took you in when no one else would. Fed you, clothed you. I've worked every day since I was 15 to pay that debt." Clara said quietly. "I've endured every insult, every stone thrown, and brought curse on this house," Henrietta shrieked. "Everything went wrong after you came. My husband dead, my health failing, the whole town set against us. Maybe they're right. Maybe you are cursed." The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Clara stood slowly, dignity wrapping around her like armor. "Then perhaps it's time I removed my curse from your home." She packed by lamplight, 2 dresses, a comb, her mother's Bible, a photograph so faded she could barely make out her parents' faces. Everything she owned fit in a single carpet bag. She had 18 cents to her name and nowhere to go. But anything was better than being sold like livestock. Henrietta had locked her door from the inside, but Clara could hear her sobbing. Part of her wanted to comfort the old woman, but the part that had finally found its spine kept her moving. She slipped out into the night as a sandstorm began building in the west. The wind whipped her hair across her face, carrying the taste of grit and distant rain. She needed to get to shelter, but where? The church would turn her away. The hotel wouldn't rent to her. The abandoned mine shaft in the foothills. It wasn't much, but it would keep the worst of the storm off. Clara pulled her shawl tight and began walking, the wind pushing her along like invisible hands. The storm hit in full force when she was halfway there. Sand and debris flew through the air, turning the world into a howling brown hell. Clara stumbled, fell, got up again. Her carpet bag was ripped from her hands and vanished into the maelstrom. She could barely see 3 feet ahead, could barely breathe through the cloth she held over her face. When she finally spotted the mine entrance, she was sobbing with relief. She dove inside just as the worst of it hit, sand scouring the rocks like a living thing. The shaft went back perhaps 20 feet before a cave-in blocked it. Clara huddled against the wall, shivering as the temperature dropped. Desert storms were like that, fury and ice all at once. She pulled her knees to her chest and tried not to think about what would happen when the storm passed. Would anyone even look for her? Would they care? She must have dozed, because she woke to the sound of her name being called over the dying wind. "Clara! Clara Mitchell!" She knew that voice. But no, she was dreaming. Why would he? "Clara, answer me! Damn it!" She crawled to the mine entrance. The storm had passed, leaving the world scoured clean under a blanket of stars. And there, silhouetted against the sky, was Jed Hartwell. "Here," she croaked. "I'm here." He was beside her in an instant, his hands running over her arms, her face checking for injury. "Jesus Christ! Woman, are you hurt? Are you—" He broke off, pulling her against him. "You scared the hell out of me. How did you find me?" Her voice was muffled against his coat. "Your aunt came to town, screaming about how you'd run off to die in the storm. I figured you had more sense than that, but then I found this." He held up a piece of her shawl, torn and caught on a sage bush. "Led me right to you. I couldn't stay," she whispered. She was going to sell me to Blackwood. His arms tightened around her, over my dead body. They stayed like that for a long moment. her shivering gradually easing as his warmth seeped into her bones. Finally, he pulled back enough to see her face. "You're coming with me. I can't. People will talk. Let them." He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "I've got a cabin up in the hills. Nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry and nobody'll bother you there." "Jed, I can't." "You can and you will." His tone brooked no argument. "Unless you'd rather go back to your aunt, or maybe take Blackwood up on his offer? That's not fair. None of this is fair." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I'm offering you a place to stay. No strings. You can leave whenever you want, but right now, you need help, and I'm the one offering. Your pride worth dying for." Clara searched his face, looking for the trap, the hidden cost, but all she saw was concern and something else, something that made her heart skip. "All right," she whispered. He lifted her onto his horse like she weighed nothing, swinging up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, and Clara let herself lean back against his chest. She was probably destroying what little reputation she had left, but at that moment, warm and safe for the first time in hours. She couldn't bring herself to care. The ride to his cabin took most of the night. As dawn broke, Clara saw it nestled in a valley between two hills, a solid structure of logs and stone with smoke already rising from the chimney. "My foreman, Pete, must have come by," Jed explained. "I sent word I might be bringing company." Inside, it was simple but clean. One main room with a kitchen area, a stone fireplace, and a curtained alcove she assumed held the bed, but there was also a small door leading to what looked like a lean-to addition. "Built that for storage," Jed said, following her gaze. "But it's got a cot and a window. Figured you'd want your own space." The thoughtfulness of it nearly undid her. "Thank you," she managed. "There's stew on the stove and coffee in the pot. I'll get your room set up while you eat." Clara hadn't realized how hungry she was until she tasted the stew. Simple fare, beef and vegetables. But after days of barely eating, it tasted like a feast. She was on her second bowl when exhaustion hit like a hammer. Jed found her asleep at the table, spoon still in hand. He carried her to the small room he'd prepared, laying her gently on the cot and covering her with a quilt his mother had made years ago. She woke to afternoon light and the sound of hammering. Through the window, she could see Jed repairing a section of corral fence. He worked with the steady rhythm of a man who knew his business. Shirt sleeves rolled up despite the cool air. Clara rose, smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could, and ventured outside. He saw her coming and stopped working, leaning on the fence post. "Feeling better?" "Yes, thank you for everything." "You thanked me already." He went back to hammering, but she caught the slight smile. "There's a creek down the hill if you want to wash up. I'll ride to town tomorrow, get you some supplies." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He hit the nail with perhaps more force than necessary. "Unless you're planning on wearing that same dress until it falls apart." Clara flushed but lifted her chin. "I'll pay you back." "I know you will." He said it simply, like it was fact. "You're not the type to take charity." "Then what is this?" He set down the hammer and faced her fully. "It's a man helping someone who needs it. It's a safe place until you figure out what comes next. It's—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I know what they say about you in town. I also know most folks are fools who'd rather blame their troubles on curses than their own failings." "What if they're right?" The words burst out before she could stop them. "What if I am cursed? Everyone who gets close to me dies, gets hurt, has bad things happen?" Jed stepped closer. "You want to know what I think? I think you've had a run of bad luck in a town full of people too small-minded to see past their own fears. That's not a curse. That's just life being harder on some than others. You don't know. I know enough." His voice gentled. "I know you're kind even to folks who treat you badly. I know you work hard and don't complain. I know you've got steel in your spine despite everything they've tried to break you with. If that's cursed, then maybe the world needs more curses." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you so good to me? Maybe because someone should be. He picked up his hammer again, suddenly seeming to need something to do with his hands. Now go on, get cleaned up. Supper's in an hour, and you can tell me what you want from town. As she walked to the creek, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the dangerous flutter of hope. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once, like standing at the edge of a cliff and thinking maybe, just maybe, she could fly. The days at Jed's cabin fell into a rhythm that felt like learning to breathe again. Clara woke with the sun, made breakfast while Jed tended the horses, then worked alongside him through the morning. There were fences to mend, a vegetable garden that had gone wild, chickens to feed, and countless small repairs that kept a ranch running. At first, she was nervous around him, waiting for demands that never came. But Jed had a way of making silence comfortable. He'd work beside her for hours, speaking only when necessary. Yet she never felt ignored. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her with that steady gaze, and something warm would bloom in her chest. "You don't have to work so hard," he told her one afternoon as she scrubbed the cabin floor. "You're a guest here. I'm not good at being idle." Clara replied, not looking up. "Besides, I pay my way. That's not why I brought you here." She sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then why did you?" He leaned against the door frame, seeming to weigh his words. "Maybe I was tired of watching good people get ground down. Maybe—" He stopped, shook his head. "Just don't work yourself to death. That's all I'm saying." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley gold and crimson. Jed had brought out his guitar, a battered instrument he admitted he wasn't much good with. "My mother tried to teach me," he said, picking out a simple melody. "Said every cowboy should know at least 3 songs. One for the cattle, one for lonely nights, and one for courting." "Which one is this?" Clara asked, then blushed at her boldness. He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his weathered face. "Haven't decided yet." She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound surprised them both. How long had it been since she'd felt light enough for laughter? "Tell me about her," Clara said softly. "Your mother." The melody faltered, then resumed slower. "Her name was Sarah, toughest woman I ever knew, until—" He set the guitar aside. "She died when I was 12. Man forced himself on her while my father was away. She fought, but—" He stared at the darkening sky. "She lived 3 days after, long enough to make me promise I'd be better than the men who'd hurt her. Jed, I'm so sorry. My father crawled into a bottle and never came out. I left the next year, been on my own since." He glanced at her. "Not telling you for pity. Just figured you should know why I can't abide seeing folks mistreated." They sat in companionable silence as stars began to prick the sky. Clara understood now the pain that drove his kindness, the way tragedy could either break a person or forge them into something stronger. "My mother used to sing," she offered quietly. "Cherokee lullabies and Irish ballads all mixed together. She said music was how souls spoke when words weren't enough. Sing something. I couldn't. Please." The request was so gentle she couldn't refuse. Clara closed her eyes and let her mother's favorite song spill out, a haunting melody about lovers separated by war. Her voice was rusty from disuse, but true, carrying across the valley like a prayer. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find Jed staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "That was beautiful," he said roughly. "You should sing more." "People in town said my voice was cursed, that it would bring bad luck to hear it. People in town are idiots." He stood abruptly. "I need to check the horses." Clara watched him go, confused by his sudden departure. Had she done something wrong? But when he returned an hour later, he brought her a cup of tea and asked if she knew any happier songs. They stayed up late trading melodies and stories, and Clara felt another wall around her heart crumble. A week passed in this gentle pattern. Then came the rain. It started as a drizzle, but soon became a downpour that turned the valley into a sea of mud. They were forced inside, the cabin suddenly feeling much smaller with both of them trapped there. Sorry about this, Jed said as they ate lunch to the sound of rain hammering the roof. Usually have warning before the weather turns. I don't mind. And surprisingly, she didn't. Though we may run out of things to talk about. Could always tell you about the time I got chased by a bear. You didn't. Did too. Course, it was a very small bear. And I may have been running more from embarrassment than fear. She smiled. Now I have to hear this. They spent the afternoon trading stories, his adventures on cattle drives, her memories of happier times before the fire. When evening came and the rain showed no sign of stopping, Jed taught her card games by lamplight. You're cheating, Clara accused as he won his 5th hand in a row. Proving it's the challenge, he said with mock innocence. She studied him across the table, the way the lamplight caught the silver threading through his dark hair, the laugh lines around his eyes, the careful way he handled the cards with his work-roughened hands. Something shifted in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. What? He asked, catching her stare. Nothing. Thunder crashed overhead, making them both jump. The lamp flickered. Storm's getting worse. Jed frowned at the roof. Might lose some shingles if this keeps up. As if in response, they heard a crash from Clara's lean-to room. They rushed to find her window had blown open, rain pouring in. Help me with this. Jed struggled to close the shutters against the wind. They fought together, both getting soaked before managing to secure the window. Clara's teeth chattered as they surveyed the damage. Her cot was drenched, along with everything else in the small space. You can't sleep here tonight, Jed said. Take my bed. I'll bunk by the fire. I couldn't. It's that or catch your death of cold. He was already gathering her few belongings that had stayed dry. Come on, no arguments. His room was behind the curtained alcove, sparse but clean, with a bed big enough for a man his size and not much else. Clara stood uncertainly in the doorway while he laid her things on the dresser. I'll get you something dry to wear. He pulled out one of his shirts and a pair of pants. They'll be too big, but better than nothing. He left to give her privacy. Clara changed quickly, rolling up sleeves and pant legs until she looked like a child playing dress-up. But the clothes smelled like him, leather and wood smoke and something uniquely Jed, and she felt safer than she had in years. When she emerged, he'd built up the fire and was laying out blankets on the floor. He glanced up, and something flashed in his eyes at seeing her in his clothes. Thank you, she said softly. Get some sleep. Storm should pass by morning. But sleep wouldn't come. Clara lay in his bed, acutely aware of his presence just beyond the curtain. Every shift of the blankets, every quiet breath reminded her he was there. The storm raged outside, but inside a different kind of tension built. Near midnight, a particularly violent crash of thunder had her sitting bolt upright. Before she could think, she called out, Jed? The curtain pushed aside immediately. You all right? She felt foolish now. The storm. I'm not usually afraid, but... Scoot over? She stared at him. What? You're scared. I'm not sleeping anyway. Scoot over. When she hesitated, he added gently, I'll stay on top of the covers. Just don't want you alone if you're frightened. Clara moved to the far side of the bed. Jed lay down beside her, careful to keep space between them. They lay in silence, listening to the storm. First night after my mother died, he said quietly. There was a storm like this. I hid in the barn, sure the world was ending. Thought if I prayed hard enough, she'd come back. Clara turned to face him in the darkness. Did you ever stop hoping? Eventually, learned the difference between hope and foolishness. His hand found hers across the space between them, though lately, I'm starting to wonder if I gave up on hope too soon. Their fingers intertwined, and Clara felt brave enough to ask, Why did you really leave so quickly that night I sang? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Because I wanted to kiss you. And you deserve better than a man who takes advantage when you've got nowhere else to go. Clara's heart stuttered. What if I don't see it as taking advantage? Clara, what if I've been hoping too? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. What if for the first time in 8 years, I feel like someone sees me as more than a curse or a burden? What if— He silenced her with a kiss, gentle as rain on summer grass. Clara had been kissed before, rough, demanding things that took without asking. This was different. This was a question, a promise, a revelation all at once. When they parted, she was crying. "I'm sorry." Jed started to pull away. "I shouldn't have—" "No." She held tight to his hand. "They're happy tears. I didn't know I could still cry those—" He pulled her against his chest then, holding her while the storm spent itself outside. They didn't speak again, didn't need to. Sometimes souls knew how to talk without words, just like her mother had said. When morning came, bringing weak sunlight and dripping eaves, they were still entwined. Clara woke to find Jed watching her with wonder, like she was something precious he couldn't quite believe was real. "Good morning," she whispered. "Best one I've had in years," he replied, and kissed her again as the world washed clean outside. Word traveled fast in the valley. Within 2 weeks, everyone from Willow Creek to the county line knew that Clara Mitchell was living at Jed Hartwell's ranch. The stories grew wilder with each telling. She'd bewitched him, seduced him, used dark magic to bend his will. Jed first heard the rumors when he went to town for supplies. Tom Wheeler at the feed store served him with obvious reluctance. "Folks are talking. Hartwell," Wheeler said as he loaded sacks of grain. "That girl you took in, it ain't proper. Since when do I care what folks think is proper?" Jed counted out payment, his movements deliberate. "Since it affects your business. Morrison's telling everyone he won't buy cattle from a man who consorts with witches." Jed's laugh was sharp as winter wind. "Morrison can tell folks whatever he wants. My cattle go to Fort Worth, not to him." But when he stopped at the saloon, the usual welcomes turned cold. Men he'd done business with for years suddenly found reasons to leave. Only Pete, his foreman, joined him at the bar. "It's getting ugly, boss," Pete said quietly. "That Brewster woman's been spreading tales that make a sailor blush. Says the Mitchell girl has you under some kind of spell." "Let him talk." "It's gone beyond talk. Found this nailed to the ranch gate this morning." Pete slid a paper across the bar. Jed read it, his jaw tightening. "Get rid of the witch or we'll do it for you," was scrawled in barely literate handwriting. "Maybe you should send her somewhere safe," Pete suggested. "Just until this blows over, she is somewhere safe." Jed pocketed the threat. "Anyone tries to make good on this, they'll answer to me." When he returned to the ranch, Clara was hanging laundry. She took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" "Nothing that matters." He started unloading supplies, avoiding her gaze. "Jed," he stopped, sighed. "People are talking. About us." "I knew they would." She twisted the wet shirt in her hands. "I should leave. I've brought you nothing but trouble." "You've brought me—" He crossed to her in 3 strides, cupping her face in his hands. "You've brought me more happiness in 2 weeks than I've had in 20 years. I'm not letting small-minded fools drive you away. But your reputation, your business, will survive. I've weathered worse storms." He kissed her forehead. "Though we might want to make things proper, if you're willing." Clara pulled back to search his face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we should give them something real to talk about." "Clara Mitchell, will you marry me?" She stared at him, speechless. In all her dreams, and she'd been dreaming lately, despite herself, she'd never imagined this. "You don't have to." "I'm not asking because I have to. I'm asking because I wake up every morning grateful you're here, because you make me laugh, because—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair in that gesture she'd come to love. "Because I love you. May not be the prettiest proposal, but it's true." "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." He spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, she was crying again, those happy tears that still surprised her. "When?" she asked. "Soon as possible. I'll ride to Cedar Ridge tomorrow. Find a preacher who doesn't know or care about Willow Creek gossip." But their joy was short-lived. That night, riders came. Clara woke to the sound of horses and rough voices. Jed was already up, pulling on his boots. "Stay here," he ordered, checking his rifle. "Jed, stay here." He slipped out into the darkness. Clara pressed against the window, straining to see. 6 men sat their horses in front of the cabin, torches casting hellish shadows. She recognized Jack Thornton and the Cutter brothers, but the others were strangers. "Evening, boys." Jed's voice carried calm as deep water. "Bit late for a social call. We're here about the witch," Thornton said. "Hand her over, and we'll be on our way." "Can't do that." "Then we'll take her." One of the Cutter boys started to dismount. The cock of Jed's rifle stopped him cold. "Try it. See how far you get." "You can't shoot all of us," another man called out. "No, but I can shoot the first 3. Who wants to volunteer?" Pete emerged from the shadows, his own rifle trained on the group. "Make that the first 6. The riders shifted nervously. They'd expected to intimidate, not face armed resistance. "This ain't over, Hartwell," Thornton spat. "That witch has the whole town hexed. We know she started that fire that killed her folks. Probably planning the same for you. Only fire I see is the one you're trying to start." Jed stepped into the torchlight. "Now get off my land before I forget my manners." They left, but not without promises of return. Jed and Pete stayed on watch until dawn, when Clara finally emerged. "I heard what they said," she told Jed. "About the fire, about me being... I don't care what they said." "You should." She wrapped her arms around herself. "What if they're right? What if everyone who gets close to me... Clara, stop." He set down his rifle, took her shoulders. "Your parents died in a fire. That's tragedy, not curse. You survived. That's miracle, not magic. But, no buts. I've made my choice. Question is, have you made yours?" She looked at him, this man who'd stood against the night for her, who saw her truth when everyone else saw only lies. "I made it the night you found me in that mine." They were married 3 days later in Cedar Ridge, with Pete and his wife as witnesses. The preacher, a young man fresh from seminary, performed the ceremony without questions. Clara wore a simple blue dress Jed had bought in town, and though it wasn't the wedding either might have imagined in youth, it was perfect in its simplicity. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, smiling. Jed lifted Clara's veil with hands that trembled slightly. "Mrs. Hartwell," he murmured, wonder in his voice. "Mr. Hartwell," she replied, and stood on her toes to meet his kiss. They spent their wedding night at a small hotel in Cedar Ridge. Clara was nervous, her hands shaking as she unpinned her hair. She'd heard stories from other women, warnings about duty and endurance. But when Jed came to her, he was so gentle, so reverent, that her fear melted like spring snow. "We don't have to," he started. "I want to," she interrupted. "I want to be your wife in all ways." He kissed her then, deep and sure. And Clara discovered that love given freely was nothing like love taken by force. In his arms, she wasn't cursed or broken or unwanted. She was treasured, cherished, beloved. They came together with passion tempered by tenderness, and Clara finally understood why the marriage bed was called sacred. Afterward, they lay entwined as moonlight painted silver patterns on the walls. "Do you regret it?" Clara asked softly. "Marrying me? Knowing what comes next?" "The only thing I regret," Jed said, pulling her closer, "is that I didn't find you sooner. Let them come with their torches and threats. They'll learn what it means to threaten a Hartwell. Our troubles are just beginning." "Maybe so." He kissed her hair. "But so is our life together." "That's worth any trouble." Clara closed her eyes, letting his certainty wash over her. Outside, she could hear night birds calling and the distant sound of coyotes. The world was still dangerous, still full of people who wished her harm. But here, in her husband's arms, she was safe. She was home. She was loved. "Jed," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away." "Thank you," he replied, "for letting yourself be seen." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and the promises they'd made. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats. But tonight, they were simply Jed and Clara Hartwell, two souls who'd found each other against all odds, and that was miracle enough for anyone. Winter came early that year, blanketing the valley in white silence. For Clara, those snowbound months in the cabin became a season of transformation. Each morning she woke beside Jed, still marveling that this strong, gentle man had chosen her. The shadows that had haunted her for so long began to fade like frost in sunlight. They developed their own rhythms. Jed would rise first, stoking the fire until the cabin warmed. Clara would follow, making coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe while he tended the stock. Evenings found them by the hearth, Clara mending clothes or reading aloud from the few books they owned while Jed worked leather or cleaned his guns. "You're different," Pete observed one afternoon when he stopped by with supplies. "Both of you, like watching desert flowers after rain." It was true. Jed smiled more, laughed easier, and Clara bloomed, away from the poisonous whispers of town. She discovered parts of herself she'd thought long dead. She sang while she worked, told stories that made Jed laugh until his sides hurt, and approached each day with growing confidence. The intimacy between them deepened beyond the physical. On the coldest nights, they'd burrow under quilts and share their deepest fears and brightest hopes. "Sometimes I dream about children," Clara confessed one night, her head on his chest. "Little ones with your eyes and my stubbornness." "That's a combination that terrorized the whole territory," Jed teased, but his arms tightened around her. "Would you want that? Children?" "I didn't think I'd ever have the chance." She traced patterns on his chest. "But with you, yes, I want everything with you." He was quiet so long she wondered if she'd said too much. "Then, we'll have beautiful babies, Clara Hartwell, and they'll grow up knowing they're loved and wanted. I promise you that." 2 weeks before Christmas, the snow let up enough for a trip to Cedar Ridge for supplies. Clara was excited. Their first town visit as husband and wife. She wore her best dress and pinned her hair carefully, wanting to look respectable. The first sign of trouble came at the mercantile. Mrs. Henderson, who'd always been coldly polite, took one look at Clara and gasped. "You! What are you doing here?" "Shopping for Christmas dinner," Clara replied evenly. "Same as you, I expect. Don't you dare speak to me. You Jezebel. We know what you did to that poor man, bewitching him into marriage." Jed stepped forward, his presence suddenly dangerous. "Ma'am, you'll speak to my wife with respect or not at all." "Mrs." Henderson backed away but didn't stop talking. "Respect? For her? She's fooled you, but she hasn't fooled us. Nancy Brewster told us all about your unholy union, living in sin for weeks before forcing you to marry her." "Nobody forces me to do anything," Jed said quietly. "I married Clara because I love her, and anyone who can't accept that can do their business elsewhere." They finished their shopping in tense silence, the store's other customers giving them wide berth. But worse was to come. As they loaded their wagon, Sheriff Brennan approached with several men. "Jed Hartwell, I'm placing you under arrest." "On what charge?" Jed didn't move, but Clara saw his hand inch toward his gun. "Cattle theft. Morrison says you've been running his brand. That's a lie and you know it." "Maybe so, but you'll have to prove it to the judge." Brennan's smile was cold. "Course, if you were to send your wife away, maybe Morrison would reconsider his complaint." Understanding dawned in Jed's eyes. "This is about Clara. This is about protecting our community from harmful influences." One of the other men said, "That woman brings nothing but trouble. The only trouble here is men who use the law for personal vendettas." Jed helped Clara onto the wagon seat. "I'll come willing, Sheriff, but my wife stays at the ranch. And if anything happens to her while I'm gone, threats won't help your case. Hartwell." Clara watched in horror as they took her husband away. The ride back to the ranch alone was the longest of her life. By the time she reached home, she was shaking with more than cold. Pete was waiting, his face grim. "Heard what happened? Don't worry, Mrs. Clara, we'll get him out. But days passed with no word. Clara threw herself into keeping the ranch running, refusing to let Jed's absence break her. She fed cattle in blizzard conditions, repaired fences with hands that bled, and fell into bed each night too exhausted for tears. On the fourth night, she woke to flames. The barn was ablaze, horses screaming inside. Clara ran barefoot through the snow, throwing open stall doors and driving panicked animals out into the night. The smoke was choking, the heat intense, but she kept going until every animal was free. She collapsed in the snow, coughing and retching, as the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks. That's where Pete found her at dawn. "Mrs. Clara, are you hurt? The horses," she gasped. "Are they—" "All safe. You saved them." He wrapped his coat around her. But who did this? They both knew the answer. The war had escalated. When Jed was finally released, the judge finding no evidence of theft, he returned to devastation. Clara met him at the gate, and he pulled her into his arms without a word. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest. "The barn, everything—" "Buildings can be rebuilt. You can't be replaced." He pulled back to examine her, taking in the bandages on her hands, the hollow exhaustion in her eyes. "This ends now." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he strode to the house and emerged with his rifle and saddlebags. "I'm going to town. Don't wait up." "Jed, no, they'll kill you." He stopped, turned back to her. "Maybe, but I won't let them terrorize my wife anymore. Either this ends tonight or we leave." Clara squared her shoulders. "Together. We'll go somewhere they can't follow. Start over. Run away. That's not who I am, Clara." "And being a widow isn't who I am." She gripped his hands. "Please, we have each other. That's all that matters. Let them have their hate. We'll take our love and build something better elsewhere." He struggled visibly, pride warring with wisdom. Finally, his shoulders sagged. "You're right. You're worth more than any land or reputation." He kissed her fiercely. "We'll leave at first light. Take only what we need." That night, they made love with desperate passion, clinging to each other as if to memorize every touch. Clara traced the scars on his body, kissed each one like a benediction. He worshipped her in return, whispering promises and endearments until she wept from joy. "No regrets?" he asked as they lay tangled in the aftermath. "None." She turned in his arms to face him. "You're my home, Jed Hartwell. Not this place. You. And you're my salvation, Clara Hartwell, my light in the darkness." They packed by lamplight. Clothes, tools, what money they had. Her mother's Bible. At dawn, they loaded the wagon and turned their backs on the ranch Jed had built with his own hands. But at the gate, a delegation waited. Not the angry mob Clara expected, but a small group led by old Mrs. Grayson, who ran the boarding house. "Heard you were leaving." "Mrs." Grayson said. "Nothing left for us here," Jed replied carefully. "Maybe not, but before you go—" She gestured to the others. "We wanted to say we're sorry. Not all of us agreed with what Morrison and his crowd did. Some of us remember when Clara's mother helped birth our babies, and her father shared his harvest in lean times." Clara sat frozen as one by one, people she'd thought hated her stepped forward with small gifts, preserved food, warm blankets, even a small purse of coins. "It ain't much," Mrs. Grayson continued, "but it's what we could gather. And there's this." She handed Jed a letter. "From Judge Whelan in Fort Worth. Says he'll vouch for you if you want to start over there. Good man. Fair." Clara found her voice. "Why? After everything?" "Because courage should be rewarded, not punished. You two showed us what real love looks like, the kind that stands against the world, made some of us ashamed." The old woman patted Clara's hand. "Be happy, child. Live well. That's the best revenge against those who wished you ill." As they rode away, Clara looked back one last time at Willow Creek. The town that had shaped her through suffering seemed smaller now, less powerful. She was leaving. Yes, but not in defeat. She was choosing love over fear, hope over hate. No regrets? Jed asked, echoing his question from the night before. None, Clara repeated, linking her arm through his. We're going home. We are home, he corrected, kissing her temple. Wherever we're together, that's home. The wagon rolled on through the melting snow, carrying them toward whatever future they would build together. Behind them, smoke still rose from the burned barn. Ahead, the sun broke through clouds like a promise, and Clara Hartwell, once the unwanted, the cursed, the rejected, rode toward her new life with her head high and her heart full. She was loved. She was wanted. She was free. Fort Worth sprawled before them like a promise of new beginnings. After 3 days of travel, Clara could hardly believe the size of it. Streets bustling with wagons and riders, buildings stretching as far as she could see, and people of every description going about their business without a second glance at newcomers. It's so big, she breathed, gripping Jed's arm. That's the beauty of it, he replied. Big enough to start fresh, big enough that folks mind their own business. Judge Whelan proved to be everything Mrs. Grayson had promised, a silver-haired man with kind eyes who welcomed them into his study without hesitation. Jed Hartwell, heard good things about you from Pete Sanders. Says you're the most honest cattleman he knows. The judge shook Jed's hand warmly, then turned to Clara. And you must be the brave young woman who saved all those horses. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hartwell. Clara blinked back sudden tears. It had been so long since anyone had greeted her with genuine warmth. Now then, Judge Whelan continued, I've got a proposition. My brother runs the largest stockyard in Fort Worth, always looking for good men who know cattle. Interested? They settled into a small house on the outskirts of town. 2 rooms but clean in theirs. Clara threw herself into making it a home, while Jed proved himself at the stockyards. Within a month, his skill with cattle and honest dealings had earned him respect and steady work. For Clara, the freedom was intoxicating. She could walk to market without whispers following. She could smile at neighbors without seeing fear in their eyes. Slowly, carefully, she began to build a life. Made a friend today, she told Jed one evening, her eyes bright with excitement. Mrs. Eliza Daniels from next door. She invited me to join her quilting circle. Jed pulled her onto his lap, grinning at her joy. That's wonderful, sweetheart. She doesn't know about before. Should I tell her? That's your choice. But Clara, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. You survived things that would break most people. The quilting circle became Clara's gateway to community. The women, wives of merchants and laborers, teachers and craftsmen, welcomed her warmly. When they learned she could sing, they begged for songs while they sewed. You should sing at the church social, Eliza suggested one afternoon. We're raising money for the orphanage. Fear flickered through Clara. I don't know. Oh, please, another woman chimed in. With a voice like yours, we'd raise twice as much. Clara agreed reluctantly, but as the date approached, old anxieties surfaced. What if someone from Willow Creek was there? What if they told everyone what she was? The night of the social. She stood frozen in their bedroom, unable to button her dress with shaking hands. I can't do this, she whispered. Jed turned her to face him, his hands steady on her shoulders. Yes, you can. You're Clara Hartwell, the strongest woman I know. You've faced down mobs and fires and years of hate. A church social should be easy. But what if, no what ifs. He finished buttoning her dress, then cupped her face. You're going to walk in there and sing like the angel you are. And I'll be right there in the front row, ready to punch anyone who says otherwise. His fierce protectiveness made her laugh despite her nerves. You can't punch people in church. Watch me. The social was held in the town's largest church, packed with more people than Clara had ever seen in one place. When her time came to perform, her knees nearly buckled, but then she saw Jed in the front row, his eyes full of pride and love, and she found her courage. She sang her mother's songs, the haunting melodies that spoke of love and loss and hope. The church fell silent. even the children stopping their fidgeting to listen. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. "Magnificent!" Mayor Thornton himself approached afterward. "Where have you been hiding this treasure, Hartwell?" "Not hiding," Jed replied, his arm around Clara's waist. "Just waiting for the right moment to share her." Word of her performance spread. Soon Clara was receiving invitations to sing at weddings, festivals, and gatherings throughout Fort Worth. Each time got easier, each applause healing another old wound, but the past has a way of finding us. Clara was at the market, humming as she selected vegetables for dinner, when she heard the voice that made her blood freeze. Well, Clara Mitchell." She turned slowly to face Elias Blackwood, the man her aunt had tried to sell her to. He looked older, meaner, his expensive clothes unable to hide the cruelty in his eyes. "It's Clara Hartwell now," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Heard you married some cowboy. Quite a step up from being unwanted goods." His smile was oily. "Does he know what you are? What your family was?" "My husband knows everything about me." "Everything?" Blackwood stepped closer, voice dropping. "Does he know about the curse? About how your mother bewitched your father? About the fire?" "There was no curse," Clara said firmly. "No witchcraft, just small-minded people spreading lies." "Lies!" His laugh was ugly. "Your mother was a half-breed witch who— Is there a problem here?" Clara had never been so glad to hear Jed's voice. He stood behind Blackwood, his hand resting casually on his gun belt, but there was nothing casual about the danger in his eyes. Blackwood turned, assessing, just catching up with an old friend. "My wife doesn't have any old friends like you." Jed stepped between them. "And if I see you near her again, we'll have more than words." "Threatening me, cowboy?" "Promising." Jed's voice was soft, lethal. "I know who you are, Blackwood. Know what you wanted to do? Come near my wife again, and they'll find you in an alley somewhere, wondering how many bones can break before a man dies." Blackwood paled, backing away. "You'll regret this, both of you. I've got influence in this town." "Try it," Jed challenged. "See how far your influence goes against Judge Whelan and the stockyard owners? Against all the people who've heard my wife sing and seen her kindness. You're nothing here. Blackwood. Just another rich bully who's about to learn what happens when he threatens the wrong family." After Blackwood fled, Clara collapsed against Jed, shaking. "How did you know to come?" "Eliza saw him approach you, sent her boy running to the stockyards." He held her close. "You all right?" "I am now." She pulled back to look at him. "You called us a family." His hand moved to her stomach, gentle and wondering. "Aren't we? Or did I misunderstand what you told me this morning about missing your monthly time?" Clara's eyes widened. In the confrontation, she'd almost forgotten. "You mean, you're happy?" "Happy?" He spun her around right there in the market, ignoring the stares. "Clara, I'm over the moon. We're having a baby." That night, as they lay entwined, planning and dreaming, Clara marveled at how far she'd come. The scared girl who'd hidden from stones and cruel words was gone. In her place was a woman who sang for crowds, who had friends, who carried new life within her. "No one will ever call our children unwanted," she said softly. "No," Jed agreed, his hand protective over her still flat belly. "They'll be so loved they won't know what to do with it all." 3 weeks later, a package arrived from Willow Creek. Inside was a letter from Mrs. Grayson. "Dear Clara, thought you should know. Elias Blackwood came through here last week, trying to stir up old troubles. Found no takers. Seems the story of your courage has grown in the telling. Some folks even say they saw an angel the night of the fire, pulling you from the flames. Morrison's lost most of his influence after what he did to you, and Jed became known. Your Aunt Henrietta asks after you, says to tell you she's sorry, she's doing poorly, but the church women are caring for her. Be happy, child, you've earned it. Mrs. G." Clara read the letter twice, then handed it to Jed. "She says my aunt is sorry." "Do you want to go back, make peace?" Clara considered, then shook her head. "I've forgiven her, but that life is behind me now. We have our future to think about." She placed his hand on her growing belly. All three of us. As spring arrived in Fort Worth, bringing wildflowers and warm breezes, Clara stood in their small garden, singing to the child within her. Neighbors paused to listen. Children gathered at the fence, and Jed watched from the doorway with eyes full of love. She was Clara Hartwell, wife, soon-to-be mother, singer of songs. The girl who'd been called cursed had become a woman blessed beyond measure, and she was wanted. Oh, how she was wanted. Spring blossomed into summer, and with it came the birth of Sarah Rose Hartwell, named for both grandmothers she would never meet but whose strength flowed in her veins. The labor was long and difficult, but Clara faced it with the same courage that had carried her through darker times. "She's perfect," Jed whispered, cradling their daughter for the first time. Tears ran unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. "Look at her. Clara, she's absolutely perfect." Clara, exhausted but radiant, traced their baby's tiny features. "She has your eyes, and your spirit. I can see it already." He placed Sarah in Clara's arms, then wrapped them both in his embrace. "My girls, my whole world." Word of the birth spread quickly through their Fort Worth community. The house filled with visitors bearing gifts and good wishes, a far cry from the isolation Clara had once known. Eliza Daniels became like a sister, helping with the baby and offering the maternal guidance Clara had missed for so long. "You're a natural mother," Eliza observed one afternoon as Clara sang Sarah to sleep. "She knows she's loved. I want her to never doubt it," Clara said softly. "To never feel unwanted or cursed or less than. She'll know every day that she was hoped for, prayed for, cherished." As Sarah grew, so did the Hartwell family's place in Fort Worth society. Jed had been promoted to manage a section of the stockyards, his reputation for fair dealing bringing in more business. Clara's singing at community events had made her beloved throughout the town. They moved to a larger house with a proper garden where Clara could teach Sarah about the plants her Cherokee grandmother had known. It was at the Harvest Festival, with 2-year-old Sarah on his shoulders, that Jed noticed the stranger watching them. Something about the man's intense stare set off warning bells honed by years of survival. "Take Sarah to the quilting display," he told Clara quietly. "I'll join you in a moment." But the stranger approached before they could leave. He was young, perhaps 25, with Clara's dark hair and something familiar in the shape of his jaw. "Pardon me," he said, his voice uncertain. "Are you Clara? Clara Mitchell, that was?" Clara froze. "I'm Clara Hartwell. Who are you?" "My name is Thomas Mitchell. I think you might be my cousin." The world seemed to tilt. Clara gripped Jed's arm. "That's impossible. All of my father's family died in the war." "Not all." Thomas pulled out a worn daguerreotype. "This was my father, your Uncle James. He survived Gettysburg, made it to California, spent years trying to find what happened to his brother's family. We only recently learned." Clara studied the image with shaking hands. The resemblance to her father was undeniable. "Why now? Why find me now?" "Because family should know family." Thomas's eyes were earnest. "Because my father never stopped regretting that he couldn't help after the fire. He passed last year, but he made me promise to find you, to tell you that you weren't alone, that you were never alone." Sarah chose that moment to reach for the stranger, babbling happily. Thomas caught her tiny hand, smiling. "And who's this beautiful princess?" "Our daughter, Sarah," Jed said, still watchful but relaxing slightly. "You've come a long way to deliver a message. Actually, I've come to stay. If Fort Worth will have me, I'm a doctor, trained in San Francisco. Thought maybe..." He looked at Clara hopefully. "Thought maybe I could get to know the family I never knew I had." The reunion was bittersweet. Thomas brought stories of her father's childhood, of family traditions Clara had never known. He also brought validation, medical knowledge that confirmed what Jed had always said. The fire was tragedy. Not curse, no witchcraft, no hexes, just the cruel randomness of frontier life. "Your mother was a healer," Thomas told Clara one evening as they sat on the porch, Sarah playing at their feet. Father said she knew herbs and remedies passed down through generations. That's not witchcraft, that's medicine. I became a doctor partly because of stories about her. Having family again changed Clara in subtle ways. The last shadows of doubt lifted from her heart. When she sang now, it was with a joy so pure that hardened cowboys wept, and churchwomen declared it proof of God's grace. The town was planning something. Clara could tell by the whispered conversations that stopped when she appeared, the mysterious smiles from her friends. Even Jed seemed in on the secret, deflecting her questions with kisses and distractions. The truth was revealed at the spring social. Mayor Thornton called Clara to the stage, where she expected to sing as usual. Instead, he turned to address the crowd. 5 years ago, Clara Hartwell blessed our town with her voice and her courage. She sung at our celebrations, comforted our sorrows, and shown us all what it means to choose love over fear. He produced an official-looking document. Therefore, by unanimous vote of the town council, we declare Clara Hartwell to be Fort Worth's official songbird, with this day, April 15th, to be celebrated annually as Clara Hartwell Day. Clara stood stunned as the crowd erupted in applause. Children threw flower petals. Women dabbed at tears, and men whistled and stomped. Through it all, she could see Jed in the front row, Sarah in his arms, both beaming with pride. "Speech!" someone called, and others took up the chant. Clara stepped forward, her voice thick with emotion. I don't have words. Once, I believed I was cursed, that I would never be wanted, never belong anywhere. But you've shown me that curses only have the power we give them. That love is stronger than hate, and community more powerful than fear." She found Jed's eyes in the crowd. "My husband told me once that I was wanted, twice as much as anyone thought. I didn't believe him then. But standing here, seeing all your faces, holding the life we've built together, I believe it now." The celebration lasted well into the night. Clara sang every song requested, her voice carrying across the town square like a benediction. Thomas played fiddle alongside her, their family harmony restored after a generation of silence. As they finally made their way home, Sarah sleeping in Jed's arms, Clara noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the square, Mrs. Grayson from Willow Creek, older now but still spry. Standing with several other women Clara recognized from her former town. "We came for your special day, Mrs. Grayson said simply. "Wanted to see the woman you've become. Your aunt would have been proud. Clara, she found peace at the end, knowing you were happy." "Thank you," Clara whispered. "For everything, for showing me that some hearts were kind even when I couldn't see it. You showed us what courage looks like," another woman added. "Willow Creek is different now. Kinder. Your leaving changed us as much as it changed you." They parted with embraces and promises to write. As Clara watched them go, she felt the last chains of her past dissolve. She was no longer the girl who ran from Willow Creek, but the woman who had found her place in Fort Worth. Back home, after Sarah was tucked into bed and Thomas had retired to the guest room that had become his, Clara and Jed sat on their porch in the gentle spring night. "Official songbird," Jed teased gently. "Quite a step up from Unwanted. All because a rough cowboy decided to want me twice as much," Clara replied, settling into his arms. "Best decision I ever made." He kissed her temple. "Though I think by now it's more than twice, probably up to 10 times as much. Maybe 20. Clara laughed, the sound bright as starlight. "Our cup runs over." "That it does, Mrs. Hartwell. That it does." Inside, Sarah called out in her sleep, not in distress, but just checking they were there. Clara started to rise, but Jed was already moving. "I'll go. You rest, songbird." Clara watched him go, this man who had seen her worth when the whole world called her worthless. In a few hours, dawn would break over Fort Worth, bringing new challenges and joys. Sarah would wake full of energy and mischief. Thomas would join them for breakfast, adding his laughter to their family symphony. Friends would stop by. Plans would be made. Life would continue its beautiful, ordinary dance. But for now, Clara sat in the peace of her porch, no longer the unwanted girl, but a woman surrounded by love. The stars above seemed to pulse with her mother's lullabies and her father's dreams. Somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird began its night song, and Clara hummed along, her voice blending with the night. She was Clara Hartwell, wife, mother, cousin, friend, official songbird of Fort Worth. Once called cursed, now known as blessed. Once rejected, now celebrated. Once unwanted, now wanted beyond measure. And that, she knew as Jed returned to wrap her in his arms, was the greatest miracle of all. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us around the Wild West Campfire for this tale of love conquering prejudice. Where are you listening to Clara and Jed's story tonight? Leave a comment below and let's share this moment together across the miles. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts. Did Clara's journey inspire you? What would you have done in her place? Until next time, partners. Keep riding toward the sunset and remember, sometimes being wanted by just one person who truly sees you is worth more than the approval of an entire town.